Picture the landscape of southern Alberta. Wide, rolling prairies stretch endlessly toward the horizon, abruptly breaking against the jagged, snow-capped silhouettes of the Rocky Mountains. For centuries, European maps labeled this vast interior as empty space, a blank, pristine wilderness waiting to be tamed. But if you were to stand on a high, windswept ridge overlooking the Bow River today, you would quickly realize just how wrong those early mapmakers were. You are not standing in an untouched wilderness. You are standing in the center of an ancient clock, a massive stone monument designed and built by human hands over 5,000 years ago, long before the first block of limestone was cut for the Great Pyramid of Giza, and centuries before the first post was driven into the chalky soil at Stonehenge. The indigenous people of the North American plains were hauling massive glacial boulders to this precise, elevated spot. They arranged them with deliberate, sacred geometry, crafting a sprawling wheel of stone spokes and circles that aligned perfectly with the cosmos. When we think of monumental ancient architecture, our minds naturally drift to the warm, sun-baked environments of the Mediterranean, the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, or the deserts of the Middle East. Canada, in the popular imagination, is a land defined purely by its nature. It is seen as a harsh, frozen expanse, beautiful, but fundamentally unshaped by ancient human hands. That narrative is a myth, hidden beneath the thick canopy of the boreal forest, buried deep in the moss of the Pacific Northwest rainforests, and scattered across the seemingly endless prairies are thousands of ancient structures. There are perfectly aligned stone circles, towering rock walls, sprawling marine traps built with the complexity of modern hydroengineering, and sheer cliff faces carved with thousands of cryptic symbols. These are the fingerprints of complex societies that thrived in some of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Societies that manipulated the landscape on a massive scale thousands of years before the first European ship ever crossed the Atlantic. Let us return to that high ridge in Alberta, known today as the Majorville Medicine Wheel, or Iniskim Umapai to the Blackfoot people. This sprawling stone arrangement commands the prairie. At its exact center sits a massive cairn, 29 feet across, constructed from heavy, unhewn fieldstones. From this central hub, 28 distinct stone spokes radiate outward, enclosed by a perfect outer circle nearly 90 feet in diameter. When archaeologists finally began to carefully excavate the site in the late 20th century, they were staggered by the timeline buried in the soil. This was not a structure built in a single season, nor was it the work of a single generation. By dating the organic material and projectile points found trapped between the lowest stones, researchers determined that the core of the monument was laid down roughly 4,500 to 5,000 years ago. But the builders didn't just walk away. Over the next several millennia, generation after generation of indigenous people returned to this exact hill. They brought new stones, adding layers to the central cairn, expanding the monument piece by piece, century by century. Imagine the unbroken cultural continuity required to maintain and expand a single monument over 5,000 years. Empires rose and fell in Europe and Asia. The Bronze Age collapsed. Entirely new languages were born and went extinct. Yet on the Canadian plains, the builders kept coming back to the wheel. The most pressing question, of course, is why? What compelled thousands of people over dozens of centuries to haul heavy rocks to this specific ridge? The true purpose of the Majorville Wheel and the dozens of similar structures scattered across the plains remains one of the great archaeological puzzles of North America. Some researchers look directly to the sky for answers. When standing at the center cairn, certain spokes of the wheel seem to align with the summer solstice sunrise, or the rising of key navigational stars, like Aldebaran and Sirius. In a landscape with few natural landmarks, where violent winter storms can bury the plains in hours, understanding the precise turning of the seasons was a matter of life and death. These wheels may have functioned as vast terrestrial calendars, signaling exactly when the buffalo would migrate, when the harsh winter was fading, and when it was time to gather for massive regional ceremonies. But for the Blackfoot people and other Plains First Nations, these wheels are far more than ancient astronomical tools. They are deeply spiritual centers, physical manifestations of the Sundance Lodge, markers of profound sacred power, and living testaments to an oral history that reaches back to the very dawn of human habitation in the Americas. Yet, as complex and ancient as the medicine wheels of the plains are, they represent only a fraction of Canada's hidden history. If we travel eastward, leaving the open skies and waving grass of the prairies for the dense, humid woods of central Ontario, the environment shifts drastically. Here, the Canadian Shield dominates the land. It is a massive, incredibly ancient geological core of exposed Precambrian rock, scoured bare by glaciers during the last ice age. It is a tough, unyielding terrain of thick pine forests, deep, dark lakes, and swarms of biting insects. And hidden deep within this wilderness lies a site that has baffled historians, terrified early explorers, and mystified archaeologists since the day it was accidentally uncovered. In the spring of 1954, a prospector wandering through the thick woods northeast of Toronto stopped to examine a strange feature in the landscape. He pulled back a thick layer of damp moss and forest soil that blanketed the ground, expecting to find common granite. Instead, he exposed a massive, gleaming expanse of white crystalline limestone. But the stone wasn't smooth. It was covered in a sprawling canvas of ancient, deliberate carvings. As teams later arrived to clear the rest of the moss away, they revealed over 1,200 distinct images etched deep into the white bedrock. There were highly detailed turtles, winding snakes, long-legged birds, and strange, eerie human figures. Some of the humanoid shapes were unusually tall. Others were carved with jagged rays of light, or horns shooting from their heads. But it wasn't just the sheer volume of the carvings that sent a chill through the researchers. It was the sound echoing from the stone itself. Beneath the massive slab of limestone, a subterranean river was rushing rapidly through absolute darkness. The water hissed and gurgled through deep crevices in the rock, creating acoustic illusions that made it sound as though voices were whispering directly from the stone. The people who carved these figures hadn't just chosen a random clearing. They had deliberately sought out this exact, haunting location. To the Algonquian-speaking peoples who inhabited this region for millennia, this site is known as Kinumagawabkong, the Teaching Rocks. The physical stone was not simply a canvas, it was a membrane. According to their traditions, the deep fissures slicing through the white limestone were physical portals to the spirit world, and the sound of the subterranean river was the murmuring of the Manitus, powerful spiritual entities. When a shaman came to this clearing, they were arriving at a sacred boundary layer where the physical and spiritual realms pressed tightly against one another. The images they carved into the rock, the towering figures, the solar shapes, the great serpents, were not meant to be mere decorations or historical records. They were records of visions, carved directly into the rock to draw out the power of the spirits residing within. Over the decades, fringe historians have tried to appropriate the Peterborough petroglyphs, pointing to certain sunburst designs or ship-like shapes, and claiming they are proof of ancient Celtic or Norse explorers wandering into Ontario. But these theories ignore the deeply rooted cultural context of the Algonquian people. the truth of the sight doesn't require imaginary European visitors to make it profound. What makes it breathtaking is that it represents an unbroken tradition of complex, abstract indigenous theology, written in stone, in a landscape so harsh that mere survival should have consumed all human energy. If the teaching rocks reveal how ancient Canadians manipulated the spiritual landscape, a journey 3,000 miles west reveals how they manipulated the physical one. Along the jagged, mist-shrouded coastline of British Columbia, the deep green of the Pacific temperate rainforest plunges directly into the icy waters of the ocean. For generations, explorers and historians sailed past these islands and fjords, marveling at the untouched, pristine wilderness. But if you time your visit perfectly, waiting for the exact moment of a massive, lunar low tide, the ocean will pull back to reveal a staggering secret. The shoreline is not natural, it has been terraformed. As the water level drops, massive, engineered rock walls begin to break the surface of the sea. These are not random piles of tidal debris. They are colossal, meticulously constructed barriers of piled stone, stretching for hundreds of yards parallel to the beach. In some inlets, they form intricate, interlocking V-shapes. In others, they are long, unbroken terraces, holding back the sand. These are the ancient clam gardens and tidal fish traps of the Coast Salish, the Haida, the Kwakwaka'wakw, and other First Nations of the Pacific Northwest. They represent a level of hydroengineering and ecological manipulation so advanced that marine biologists are only now beginning to fully understand how they work. The builders of these marine traps didn't just want to catch fish. They wanted to fundamentally alter the ocean's behavior. By rolling massive, heavy boulders to the lowest tide line, they created retaining walls. Over decades and centuries, high tides would wash sediment, gravel, and sand over the walls. As the tide receded, the stone barrier would trap that sediment, preventing it from washing back out to deep water. Slowly, generation after generation, the pitch of the beach flattened out. This artificial terracing created the perfect, sprawling habitat for butter clams and littleneck clams, vastly increasing the food supply. Other stone traps were designed with such precise calculations of tidal physics that they allowed adult salmon to swim over the walls at high tide, only to strand them in shallow holding pools when the ocean retreated. Dating an underwater stone wall is notoriously difficult for archaeologists, as the ocean constantly scours away organic evidence. But recent core samples taken from the sediment trapped beneath these walls have yielded astonishing dates. Some of these colossal marine engineering projects have been actively maintained and modified for at least 3,500 years. They are older than the Colosseum in Rome, built by communities who understood the gravitational rhythms of the moon and the sea so perfectly that their structures still function today. And yet, as ancient as these coastal monuments are, they belong to a lineage of survival that stretches back even further, to the very edge of the ice. To find the most haunting architectural ruins in Canada, you must leave the towering cedars of the West Coast and travel far to the north, beyond the tree line, into the brutal, freezing expanse of the high Arctic. Here, in a landscape of frozen rock, howling winds, and endless winter darkness, survival seems impossible. But when modern Inuit hunters travel across these remote islands, they sometimes pass the ruins of massive, rectangular stone foundations. These foundations are enormous, sometimes stretching over 150 feet long, built from heavy, moss-covered boulders and the massive ribs of bowhead whales. The modern Inuit do not claim to have built these giant longhouses. Their oral traditions speak of a different people, a mysterious race of giants they called the Tuniat, who inhabited the ice long before the Inuit arrived. When archaeologists finally excavated those frozen stone foundations in the 20th century, they confirmed the oral histories. The artifacts pulled from the permafrost did not belong to the ancestors of the modern Inuit. They belonged to an entirely different, heavily isolated society. Archaeologists named them the Dorset culture. The Dorset people were a profound anomaly. They built these massive, permanent stone structures in the harshest environment on Earth. Yet, strangely, they possessed no bows and arrows. They had no dog sleds to traverse the vast ice fields. They didn't even use drills to make holes in their tools. Despite lacking the crucial survival technologies used by every other Arctic culture, the Dorset thrived in the freezing wasteland for well over 1,000 years. They hunted enormous walruses with hand-thrust spears and carved haunting, highly expressive masks out of driftwood and bone. Faces with hollow eyes and downturned mouths that look as though they are screaming into the Arctic wind. They were masters of the ice, building massive stone gathering places where dozens of families would wait out the brutal, months-long winter night. And then, around 800 years ago, the campfires went out. The massive stone longhouses were abandoned to the wind and the drifting snow. For reasons that still spark fierce debate among Arctic archaeologists, the Dorset people simply vanished. Perhaps it was a sudden, brutal shift in the global climate, a medieval warming period that fractured the thick sea ice they relied upon for hunting walrus and seals. Or perhaps they were slowly outcompeted and pushed to the absolute fringes by a new wave of highly mobile, technologically advanced people migrating rapidly from the west, the Thule, the direct ancestors of the modern Inuit, who brought with them dog sleds, advanced whaling floats, and recurve bows. Whatever the precise cause of their collapse, the Dorset left behind only their heavy stone foundations and their haunting ivory carvings, frozen in the permafrost like quiet ghosts of a forgotten epoch. Their disappearance speaks to a profound and unsettling truth about history, especially here in the vast expanse of North America. Time, weather, and the sheer scale of the landscape have a way of swallowing the past. For centuries, when European explorers, fur traders, and eventually settlers pushed westward across the continent, they looked at the dense pine forests, the sprawling prairies, and the craggy coastlines, and they saw a blank slate. They convinced themselves that they were stepping into a pristine, untouched wilderness, a world completely devoid of civilization or monumental history. This belief was not just a tragic misunderstanding, it was a psychological tool. It is much easier to claim a continent if you convince yourself that no one has ever truly shaped it. But the stones tell a completely different story. The Earth itself holds the receipts of complex, highly organized societies that engineered their environment in brilliant, sustainable ways. The builders of the Majorville medicine wheel in Alberta were mapping the stars and tracking the deep rhythms of the cosmos thousands of years before the Roman Empire existed. The Algonquian shamans who carved the Peterborough petroglyphs were interacting with a deeply mapped spiritual geography, leaving theological records etched into the very bones of the Canadian Shield. The coastal engineers of the Pacific Northwest were actively terraforming the ocean's edge, managing marine ecosystems with a sophisticated understanding of tidal physics that kept their populations fed for millennia. And the Dorset people were assembling monumental stone architecture in the darkest, coldest, most unforgiving environment on the planet. What is truly humbling is the realization that we are likely only seeing a fraction of what was actually built. For every stone wheel that survived the plows of early 20th century farmers, how many were dismantled or plowed under? For every clam garden revealed by a plunging low tide in British Columbia, how many thousands more are completely submerged, lost to the rising sea levels of the post-glacial world? Canada's vast boreal forest alone covers over 1 billion acres, an impossibly dense tangle of spruce, moss, and muskogee that is notoriously hostile to archaeological surveys. Modern tools like LiDAR, using lasers from the sky to strip away the forest canopy and reveal the shapes of the ground below, are only just beginning to be deployed in these remote regions. When they're uncovering lost villages, ancient trading routes, and strange geometric earthworks hidden right beneath the trees. Every time a remote road is carved through the Northern Territories, new anomalies emerge from the soil. We are not nearing the end of discovering Canada's ancient history. We are only just finding the beginning of it. The history of this land is not merely a story of survival against the harsh elements. It is a story of profound mastery. The ancient people of North America did not simply endure the wilderness. They tamed it, they shaped it, and they encoded their memory into it. They built monuments out of the materials the landscape provided: limestone, granite, glacial erratics, and the bones of whales. Because they didn't build with marble columns or construct towering masonry ziggurats, later generations completely failed to recognize the sheer scale of their engineering. But true civilization isn't just about building the tallest tower to defy nature. It is about understanding your environment so perfectly that you can weave your architecture seamlessly into the fabric of the earth itself. Today, the wind still howls across the high ridge above the Bow River. The tidal waters still rush against the heavy stone walls in the Pacific coves. The deep subterranean river still echoes beneath the white limestone of the Teaching Rocks. These structures have survived ice, time, and the erasure of colonization. They stand today as quiet, unyielding witnesses to the deep time of the continent. They are reminders that long before the maps were drawn, before the borders were established, and before history was written down in ink, this vast landscape was already known, already loved, and already carved in stone. If you want to keep uncovering the lost monuments and hidden histories of the ancient world, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. What mysterious archaeological site should we explore next? Let me know down in the comments. Until next time, keep looking beyond the map.